And thank you for, sparing all this time. I know this is a
Mhm.
crazy time to ask. And before this, the elections were going on, and before that, COVID, and now again, COVID is continuing. And thank you for, sparing all this time. Great. So I think we are on. So again, thank you, David, for having this conversation with me, and also just catching up during this, catastrophe. I consider it a climate catastrophe, and of course, it's linked to all these other things that are going on: loss of biodiversity, and then linked to COVID-19, and linked to so many social issues. So really appreciate the time. And before that, we had the election. So too many things on our head, right?
Yeah, I'm happy to clear some space and talk about the important things and not just the urgent things. Urgent things are on our mind, and but not necessarily the most important ones. Um, well, you've been so active in bringing sustainability perspective into CIES. So, how do you see this moment of history as impacting the CIES and on the issues of sustainability?
So I actually want to take the lead from this and go back to 2019, when we did the conference there, the 2019 conference
Yeah.
of at San Francisco. And I thought that that conference, it brought the sustainability element into the main conference, because it was a SIG earlier on, sustainability environmental education. But how did you even come about this topic, and how did you decide to bring this topic to be the main theme for the conference, David? And I just want to also reiterate that it was not just 2019, the preparations for it from 2018, when you had asked a couple of us to present our sustainability plans in 2018 conference. And I remember having a breakfast meeting, and Oren was there presenting with us, and of course Aaron took the lead and presented. But that was all a six perspective. But you took all of that, and I remember working with you on the mission statement and the whole organization of it. It was so democratically done, and you took the pains, because we were all very energized about this topic, and you probably got like a million comments. So how did you think about this topic, and how did you what were your learning experiences from 2019?
Well, let's start present and go backwards then. Maybe not the very present, but I'll start at a moment in when you and I found each other in the that regional meeting in George Mason University. I think that was in when was that actually? That was
18 or
it
or-
was 2000. You know, I can't remember whether it must not have no. It must have been in fall of 2017,
probably.
uh, right? Uh, because people start developing the themes for topics more than a year in advance. And I remember at that time, I do remember wanting to do something about sustainability. And I remember coming around with different pieces of paper to different people, including you, and saying, which looks better to you? Uh, Education for sustainable development, education for sustainable. I don't know. There were several different options, and it was kind of an interesting exercise. You were probably the one who said. I think you were the one who said education for sustainability as opposed to um, other alternatives, maybe a sustainable development. Uh, Funnily enough, I remember that same meeting showing those papers to Monisha, and she was very definite about some other thing. I said, "Oh, God, that's interesting." And by the way, Radhika thinks it's this way. She said, "Oh, that's interesting." So I mean, it was democratic in the sense that I really didn't know how it would be seen by other people, and I remember talking to several people, and of course, we eventually came up with the sustainability, which was hard to translate into some languages. If I remember, uh, in Spanish, there's the word sustainable means different things. In English, you can say, I sustain this argument, I sustain such and such. And the word, but um, it's the same, written the same way and pronounced the same way, regardless of whether it's you're sustaining the environment or sustaining an argument. But in Spanish, it's different. So I remember we talked a lot about what exactly are we trying to say, and there were people in Spanish who didn't know. And as I'm sure you realize from your life experience, the best way to really understand something is try to explain it in a different language and try to really translate it. And then you say, oh, that's what it means. So uh, but you're asking what was the origin of this meeting. In my own personal meeting, it goes back to the early 2000s, when me and the other comparative education review editors had all seen uh, the film An Inconvenient Truth with Al Gore presented. And my late colleague Heidi Ross wanted to call for a special issue of the Comparative Education Review called Educators and the Environment, which you and about maybe one other person submitted papers to, great papers. And they went through the regular review process, and you know the answer, and you know it was that the paper that you wrote on Bhopal was accepted, and it was great. So that was originally going to
I
be.
just mentioned, David, that that paper became the paper it became because of your comments, because you were there shaping it. And I remember I was just a PhD student at that time. I sent in something without even a letter, and you were kind enough to tell me that usually people send like a letter along with their paper and these others. So I'm really grateful that you gave us the opportunity and.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad it was I mean, we didn't do that. I didn't do that for every paper, only the ones that were really good. So it's not like you can't save every paper. Uh, but where I was going with that was that it was a great disappointment. I don't know if you remember this part of it, that we originally thought, oh, this is such an important topic. We're going to get like dozens and dozens of submissions, and we'll select the best ones, and we'll have 5 or maybe 6 articles in a special issue. And we were just unprepared for the fact that we only got, I think, just 2 decent submissions. Can you remember what was the other one that maybe you would not have known if it came in response to the education and the environment? But around that same time, there was somebody else who also submitted something that was good, and we accepted it. Can you remember who it was? Because I can't right now. Is it is it possible it was Oren Pismoni Levy? I don't remember. I don't really remember. I remember yours very clearly. But you're asking me about the origins of this idea of a conference for education and sustainability. It was the realization, not just to me, but also to Heidi Ross and Mark Ginsburg, that yeah, we do think this is an important area, and and yet it seems that people in our field are not really paying attention to this. Uh, so and at that point we couldn't really do anything about it. We couldn't we probably in an annual editorial we made note of the fact that we were disappointed, that we'd wanted more articles. um, it was the it was the only special issue that we found that really failed. All the other topics that we circulated, we got a lot of submissions for. Even interestingly enough, I mean, I was not sure when we had announced a special issue on education and Islam that we would get lots of submission, but we got over 40. Now, part of that was because we had recruited, somebody who was a high-profile guest editor, who made a lot um, of outreach. But going back to the environment, we were really disappointed. So that was an experience that I kept in my mind, and then I thought to myself, if I could never do anything about this to try to uh, raise the profile of the environment. And at that point, I think in the early 2000s, I don't think I'd even heard the word, or education for sustainability. I'm sure it was around, but it wasn't my field either. When I was the word that I was more using was the environment, education to protect the environment. So that's the whole origin. I don't think I've ever told anybody this before. So you're the first person to know this history. So you played two key roles in it. One, when you were, as you say, a graduate student and submitted a paper in response to this call for papers, and two, then when, in 2017, when we were actually looking for different labels for the name of the conference.
Thank you. I think that is a very good background, David. And so I guess we've moved from 2019, where this topic became the mainstream topic, to 2022 with education beyond human. um, and sometimes I see this picture and I don't know whether Miami is drowning, or these waves look so big, or I don't know, I need to be calming myself, or but yes, so this 2020 became again a big focus on education beyond the human. I think we have one thing, the question that it asks is how should education respond to the world of shifting planetary boundaries and collapsing ecosystems, as well as configuration of relationship between humans and the earth. So again, we are going back to the same topic, but I now worry whether is it just going to be these two one-off topics, CIS's conferences on sustainability and environment, or do you think we need to be thinking about much more of a strategic focus on this particular topic, given the need and given that we are in a pandemic right now because of loss of biodiversity? So I don't want all your efforts in for one conference and then all of the current president Iveta Silova's work on just being two conferences when the world needs so much of the same discussions, because this is just a conversation starter. It has not reached its um, pinnacle, to so to speak. So I don't know if you have any reflections on that.
Well, I hadn't really reflected on it until you put it that way. Um, when you're talking about strategies, it is hard as a teacher to move beyond the next step of beyond consciousness raising. When you, it's important as a teacher and as being in the pedagogy of teaching the whole users of CIES, that there are serious problems in the world, and yes, they have something to do with education, and so it's important to make people aware there's a problem, but then it's important to try to channel that energy and that concern into some uh, strategic actions. Otherwise, it just leaves people frustrated. If we were strategic planners about this, maybe it would have been better for somebody, maybe me or maybe a veteran, to have come up first with the topic of education beyond the human and just talk about all the epical changes, the collapse of the ecosystem, everything terrible that's happening, and then say, okay, so what can we do about it? Because I believe that the other reason for um, the 2019 theme, it wasn't just that I had this personal frustration with the CER, it was the fact that the United Nations was adopting sustainable development goals, and that the United States was withdrawing from UNESCO, and that CIS is a US organization, and that I was suggesting that we in the CIS engage with some institutions, that we don't just take this as personal problems, but that we uh, enlist the help of people who are really professionals in this area, especially our Neller lecturer, Jeff Sachs, who very graciously and heroically brought to our meeting, uh, so that we would take the next step. If you ask me what comes first, the consciousness of the emergency or taking action, I would probably say it's first important to make everybody aware that there's a crisis, and then channel that into some strategy. Um, I guess it's not necessary that we do this sequentially, as long as people remember that we are just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of um, education researchers, majority of whom are in the United States, who are doing our research, that we're just tiny. That it, as long as we remember that there's these organizations and larger collective enterprises that we can bring us to, fine. It doesn't matter which comes first, the education for sustainability or education beyond the human. Uh, the slight worry I have is that it's just so overwhelming, especially with COVID, that people will just say, "Oh my God, this is a crisis." I mean, and what they end up being is demoralized or just burnt out and frustrated without noticing that they could be part of a larger collective action uh, to advance everything. Now, I'm not suggesting. I don't think that I'm sure that Iveta and those who organized the 2020 conference, they're not feeling like that. But my question is, I don't know how most CIS members are feeling at this point, or do they feel that there are collaborations and channels possible for them to contribute to?
Yeah, and I think the current CER also includes a lot of essays on this topic, on how 2020 had become this all inclusive conference, and it stretched to not just a week or 5 days to about 6 weeks, and how everyone did their bit. The six did their work. So I think it became much more of a community based organization, where a lot of I myself with my colleague Christina Kwok, we were
Mhm.
able to invite a lot of local activists, local other, people who and economists who would not generally come for CIS conference because it is
That's
education.
great.
But at the same time, I feel that we had all these amazing discussions on environment, education for sustainable development, climate change education. But as a society, are we supposed to just have these discussions without having a clear strategy, or without having any change in behaviors ourselves? And
Mhm.
COVID gave us this reality check that there are things that we need to change. And so, is CIS ready for that change, where we are not just coming and saying, oh, climate change is very important and this is what we are doing in our classes? What about our own practices? And when are we going to change those practices?
Mhm.
So, as a society, are we ready to move towards a new build back better? How are we building back better CIES? So, I don't know if you have any strategies or just ideas, David. I wanted to hear from you so that we can try to build upon what you say as a thought leader on this field. And you obviously held the 2019 conference on the topic. And so, how can we build back better, keeping sustainability and CIS in mind? Because what is happening right now is that I feel that it is very much of a, the president comes in, he has a or she has a vision, the president goes out, but the problems of the earth remains the same. So can we have a CIA strategy that moves across all the presidents and have that strategy in place, so that there is one framework for to follow, rather than it being such an ad hoc? Yes, today we will have a online and tomorrow we will not, and then
Mhm.
third day we will meet in person, and then can we also move away from these compostable cups and cloth bag ideas? Because I think we have gone past that stage of, unfortunately, we are not, that doesn't solve the purpose anymore. So how are we bringing in those bold concepts to practice?
The two things come to mind. Um, and these are not necessarily suggestions, but I don't know how practical they are. The most immediate thing that I'm sure you've been in conversations about is whether the CIS should even have a physical conference where we bring people all around the world and come to some place. It's very expensive. It's obviously we're not setting good examples even for ourselves and our own behavior with all this consumption. So the 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 problem, obviously, you've heard this people say about this before, is that as a result of decisions that were made before I rejoined the board, now our friend Najib and the infrastructure of Pittsburgh depends on having those conferences. There's no other way to put it. If we could go back to having something decentralized, small, that's fine. We could do that, but we would be doing it with a volunteer um, infrastructure. There's no way that we could support a 280 or $300,000 administrative budget just with our membership dues. Okay, so I'm not opposed to doing that, but we just have to be clear that that's what this is about. I mean, it doesn't mean that we immediately um, don't renew the contract for the executive director, but in 1 or 2 years, that's what would happen if we don't have a conference. Um, and it may be desirable to go that route. Uh, so that's one thing. The other thing is the sustainability of this as a theme across presidents, and that's really important. So historically, the way that this has happened in CIS is that there have been standing committees that exist beyond any president. So I have not been successful even in getting the board to vote with a 2/3 vote to create a social and policy engagement committee in general. So I don't know if you realize this, but this committee that exists that you've seen about is what's called an ad hoc committee. It technically disappears every time there's a new president. So it would be really healthy if there were some kind of committee that was committed and that was charged with keeping this issue alive and with bringing it to the board's attention over the years. That's been done somewhat with the Gender and Education Committee. Um, I say somewhat because I don't really think that there have been consistent themes, except for representation of women. I mean, that's the easiest thing for them to focus on. But have anyway, that has existed over many years. The New Scholars Committee has also been a standing committee. That's also, kept alive the importance of new scholars, but I'm not really sure what particular thing they've done other than organize around the meeting. That's another problem, that we're such a conference-centric organization that for all these three standing committees, URIAG, Gender, and New Scholars, it's all been about what can we do to help people at this annual meeting. And I think that we all recognize it's important to break beyond that. Especially we're talking about not even having a physical meeting, then what can we do? But going back to your question, I would be in favor of trying to create a standing committee to um, remind the board or remind each new president that these are challenges of our organization, and we must keep addressing environmental sustainability.
Great. I think that's such a great suggestion, David, because the standing committee should have a mandate much larger than making the conference sustainable, because it is not
Mhm.
about a conference, it's about us as
Right.
a society. Because otherwise it boils down to how can we make our bag reusable, and can we do compostable cups, which I don't know whether they are compostable or not, because there's so many things that we have to think about. And then have, so it's like few things that we are busy doing, but we are missing out on the larger importance of keeping sustainability as a front and center role in shaping the planet, and in shaping us as a society that contributes to the planet. So I completely agree with your idea.
Just I'm going to put you on mute. I have to answer this call. Sorry, that was my physician's office just confirming an appointment next week. So I had to answer the call.
It's
Yeah, a standing committee would be great. You would be the logical person to chair the standing committee, but of course I'm not the president anymore. So
we have many
uh,
more people who can do that, but I think I like the concept of having a standing committee, David.
mm,
Actually, I want to get back to your paper, CIES paper, which I think
yeah,
is so critical for us to all understand, like the after progress that you mentioned. And I find this very disturbing that, we are basically seeing for all of the education that we are doing, where more educated people in some countries apparently prefer economic growth over environmental protection.
right.
So I feel that if our education is going wrong, we need to be doing much more than just doing education, but actually bringing this to real life. And here we are discussing CIS's economic plan. Are we thinking of it being more important than our environment and our environment protection? Because it translates to the same thing as us prioritizing our growth. Of course, every organization has to think about its business plan, but we can come up with various different ways of bringing in sustainability elements and economic plans, right? It doesn't have to be at odds with each other.
Okay, well, I produced that graphic and talked about that in After Progress, not specifically because I think that research is so definitive, but just as an example of, hey, there's definitely things you can be doing if you're, and it doesn't even have to be any one style of research. We happen to use cross-national quantitative survey data, but somebody else could do ethnographic, work about disasters. About I'd love to know what teachers in countries like China are thinking about all those pollution lockdowns that they're having when schools are not in session. I mean, how is this affecting the life of the teachers? There's lots of things that could be done um, for research and education and the environment. Um, I think that we have to stop spinning the wheels and just saying there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem. The question is, what do we do about it? Now, we're citizens, we can do some things as members of our university for sure. But what I was also saying is that if we, to the extent that we're researchers, because many of us, perhaps still the majority, I'm not sure, um, wear that hat as education researchers, we need a clear agenda for what to do, and it has to be a broad agenda. The fact that it's clear doesn't mean it's saying that these are the only questions that we should be asking and these are the methods we should be using, but we should certainly have a list of things to do. And so, maybe what we need is a reading list. Then as teachers, we should have some sample syllabi that we could use. Um, right now, we've got nothing. We're just like as individuals concerned about it, with the exception of the SIG in the CIES. So I would turn it around a little bit and say, well, maybe the SIG, even though it's not a standing committee, ought to um, compile class syllabuses, compile a list of topics. Um, Maybe next time the CIS has any discretionary money at all, it ought to, tell the SIG, you know, do a request for proposals widely. This will elevate things. Try to get some matching money from another foundation, and because people in our underfunded field are always attracted when there's a prospect of some funding. Um,
That's
so
nice.
as researchers, as teachers, we need to take the next step.
So maybe compile all these resources, syllabuses, and put it up on a SIG or CIS
Yeah,
website so that everyone can access it and add to it probably.
yeah, that would be wonderful. I mean, I would say it's the next step, except unfortunately, it's the first step because as I was saying very critically at the end of my presidential address, we haven't even done that for comparative education in general. It's not that we know what a comparative education class looks like, and now let's have a more advanced class in sustainability. we don't even have a collective syllabus system at all, and unlike some scholarly associations that at least do that. So we have a lot of work to do to change the culture and get people to be engaged with moving beyond their own personal research and teaching.
Great. I think those are great suggestions, David. We are almost reaching at the hour of our, conversation. I don't want to keep you for too long, but maybe if CIES, on my last question, if CIES needs to prioritize and think about the planet, maybe one or two things that we should prioritize now, given that, we are recovering from the pandemic. I want to be hopeful. What would those priorities be going forward? That goes beyond presidents.
That's such an important question. I'm tempted to say, I just want to think about it and get back to you. I can say two things come to mind. I don't know whether these are the priority. Would be uh, the the roles of teachers who are citizens also. Are teachers able to um, make any changes in their teaching and affect change in students? Um, and then the curriculum, which is easier to study because it's more centralized. Teachers and curriculum, uh, in when we were doing that cross-national study I told you about, we couldn't explain the fact that why it is in some countries people with more education had more progressive environmental views than others, and some people were just interested in job growth. I mean, when after we controlled for income level and other things that you would think would explain that, we still found variations cross-nationally. And the thing that must have been missing from our analysis is because we didn't have it, is we didn't know the extent to which people in different countries were being even exposed to environmental education. So I would like to know whether that can explain some of the cross-national differences. And I also don't know the extent to which as um, teachers were environmentalists in different countries. Those are two things that come to my mind from a research point of view. Okay, but going back to your question, the probably the most immediate priority is this painful one I told you about at the beginning, which is it's not just that the fact that CIS has an impact on the environment by having an annual conference. It's the fact that it seems inconsistent with the discourse on environmental sustainability to maintain this, but ask people to fly from all over the world. So I think that that's like a really coming to terms, and I don't know what the answer is going to be. So uh, I guess that is a priority because it's already with us, and we have to address that. Um, I think I wasn't part of this, but there was a conversation that CIS, some people in CIS were having last week or the week before. Do you know anything about that? There was a conversation of the future of conferences.
Yes,
Uh,
that's the conference. Actually, I'm one of the members.
okay, well, you should inform me because I've been keeping a distance from that since I'm the former president. I'm more listening now than speaking.
That's
What
wanted
were what
conversation.
were people were people willing to um, make a trade-off, go back to having a volunteer infrastructure in exchange for not having a conference revenue? What were people thinking?
Yes. So the idea was to have a couple of town halls to invite everyone and to share their perspectives. And clearly, there was so much of turnout last time. David, there were more than 75 or so people who joined, and then everyone said that visas are a big problem. And then bans become a big problem if the president of a country decide to ban certain groups, and that becomes a problem. And then, of course,
Mhm.
expenses are quite a bit. So we had heard a lot of problems, and then there were some innovations on how can we do this, in a different way, maybe spread it out, have some regional conferences.
Mhm.
So we are still having a dialogue, and your conversation today is helping that dialogue also, because we can take some ideas from you and integrate it into a report, or have much more of a discussion based on your thoughts. So having the standing committee, I think, cutting across different presidents, I think might be helpful. And also, maybe a stance or a paper on, our moral obligation towards our planet, might be good to have, like we had for UNESCO. What is it that we stand for as a society, given where we are? So I think there are a lot of possible outcomes, but we are still in that discussion period, and this is an opportunity for us to, learn from you, to see how your inputs can feed into that discussion, David. But
Okay, well,
I
it sounds very healthy. Um, for me, the bottom line is yes, I would be willing to give up um, the infrastructure, the paid infrastructure CIS, because most of my time in CIS, it's only in 2013, for me, a very short time ago, that CIS even got to have an executive director. And there've been a lot of problems with it. I mean, and it's not problems with Najib. It's just the whole idea of this other layer of things. It it would be it would be a I would be willing to try to go back to a CIS that didn't spend so much money and didn't earn so much money. But I think that everybody who participates in the conversation should realize that is the trade-off. You can't, as they say, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't expect to have a $800,000 annual budget and depending upon membership dues only. So that's the reality. We would be going back to the time when I was editing the CER. Every year, this comparative education review got $30,000 from CIS, and the secretariat also got $30,000, and that was it. That was it. And we weren't that small. We still had more than 2,000 members. So, uh, and the conferences, yes, we had annual conferences, but they were more like in universities. We had one at Teachers College that you probably remember. Um, and yeah, it was lower scale. It was smaller scale than.
And then a
than
lot of people said that we need to go back to the universities. It was much more cozier than having all these hotels, fancy hotels to go to. So those were a couple of recommendations that came up in our last town hall meeting also, David. But just broadly speaking, I think it will be a disservice to everyone if, as CIS, we come and discuss environmental education, and then we also are part of this big, carbon emission through our own conference. So some way where we can resolve this, and come to a middle path, I think, and push some boundaries. We have an opportunity, for good or for bad, to think about how we can reshape things after COVID-19. So I appreciate all your thoughts.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I've learned a lot from you today, also, and it's really nice to talk to you because, as I say, you were the in some way the beginning and also not the end, but at both ends of this with your initial submission to the CER. What year was that? Probably about 2000 and
11.
2011.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, Radhika, great talking to you. Bye
Thank
bye.
you so much. Take care, David. Thank
Yeah.
you.